But the other one that I used to interview on the couch sometimes was Muhammad Ali.
Mm-hmm.
And I did get an opportunity to speak with him. In fact, I became quite friendly with him. He visited Australia in the late 70s when he was completely healthy and at the peak of his profession. And he was holding a press conference at a hotel in Sydney. I was a kind of young, I was probably 18 years old. I was a cub radio reporter, and I was sent to talk to him. And I sat down and joined the press conference with all the other journalists there, and he wasn't turning up. Everyone was just waiting for him. So my buddy who worked for 60 Minutes, I tapped him on the shoulder. I said, come on, let's go and find his room. I don't remember how we found his room, but we did. And we knocked on the door, and the big man opened the door and he said, you go, you stay. He was always a sucker for a young, pretty lady.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. Joining me today as we get off the Bruce train, though I'm sure he will come up in a timey-wimey episode. It's my afternoon, her morning, Sandy?
Absolutely.
Yes. So Sandy Kaye, all the way from Australia, is joining us today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jesse. It's lovely to be with you and to be with a fellow Bruce fan. It's awesome. Well, and lots of fellow Bruce fans, really, because all your listeners are into him, aren't they?
Absolutely. So Sandy does a podcast, radio show, all about music of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, a breath of fresh air. And I guess we got to start out with, we lost Olivia Newton-John this week.
Yeah, we sure did, unfortunately. And also Judith Jarham from the Seekers.
Yes.
So it's certainly not been a good week for Australian music. But poor Olivia at only 73, she was your darling. She was our darling. We laid claim to her as one of her own. And actually, I'm a very close friend with some of her nieces and nephews, because they had a very big family, the Goldsmiths, and they're completely devastated. They lost their mother, Rona, who was Olivia's sister, just a few months back.
Oh,
and
no.
Now Olivia just out of the blue. But Olivia, as you know, has been fighting this breast cancer for the last 30 or so years. But very, very sad news indeed. And you can imagine what big news it's been all over Australia.
Yeah, it's pretty big here in the US too. I mean, I just see tons of social media, just so much, outpouring of love and appreciation for her. I posted that she truly was an icon of my youth. I graduated high school in 77, so I can remember hearing all those songs on the radio and going to see, Xanadu and Greece, and it's just devastating.
Yeah, well, I think she played a huge part in a lot of people's lives, really, no matter how old you are. I mean, my kids, Grease was one of those movies that just transcends generations. So my kids are as into that movie as we were way back then. Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So yes, very much good thoughts to her and her family, and she will be missed. All right. So Sandy, tell us about yourself. Just give us your little elevator pitch.
Well, I've been a journalist since the late 70s, since I jumped out of a law degree at university, much to my father's disgust. I ran away and joined the media circus, first on the Gold Coast here in Queensland, for anybody who knows their geography in Australia. And radio, as I'm sure everybody knows, was one of those industries that you hop around 6 months in this job, 6 months at another station. So I'm kind of about 250 different jobs down since setting out. I've had a long history in radio, both as an on-air presenter and a producer. And I've done lots of television too. I've been a news reporter and current affairs correspondent and worked behind the scenes producing for various entertainment shows. And I've done a lot of producing for lots of your entertainment shows there, lots of different shows that were looking for interviews from Australia. So I was always the person on the ground here for the United States, which has been lots of fun. I got into this podcast during the pandemic. I was previously doing lots of live entertainment reports for various radio stations here. And when people started not being able to come in and fill their shifts during lockdown, a couple of my stations said to me, "Oh, do you think you could extend what you do instead of being a 20-minute report? Could you blow it out to be an hour's show to help us cover the loss in roster?"
Sure.
Okay, I'm up for a challenge, always up for a good challenge. So I started to build this little radio show on my laptop. And because it was the pandemic, I started reaching out to all the musicians that I liked best when I was that pivotal age of 15, when your musical tastes sort of start to tailor off, and they were the best days of our lives. So I started reaching out to a whole lot of 70s stars that I thought that I would never get hold of. And because of the lockdowns, they were all at home, not touring, not making music at as much a loss as I was. And they're going, "Yeah, okay, I'll talk to you." So I was starting to score some awesome interviews. And I got to say that still goes on, really. I'm getting some fabulous interviews. But that was the birth of A Breath of Fresh Air. It started out as this kind of rapid-paced radio show. I mean, radio shows go in sort of, 4 segments an hour or whatever.
Right.
So I was
Yeah,
bang, 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 doing
Sure.
it really quickly. And I didn't put it up as a podcast until fairly recently. In fact, only in April, I started loading some of these shows on and calling it a podcast. And as a result, I've been paring it back and simplifying it so that it fits the podcast format a lot more. It's not quite so fast paced. I let the interviews run longer, and they're more chatty. There's more pauses. It's more kind of natural flowing conversation rather than fast paced radio. So it's been a learning curve for me all round. But I still love it. It's featured on around 150 radio stations across the world. A couple in the States, from Bolivia to Kenya and everywhere in between. And it's up as a podcast, trying to find more and more audience there, which is not an easy task. I kind of feel like I'm a veteran of traditional media, so I know how to control that and what to do there. And now I've been reduced to a complete babe in the woods in terms of podcasting. I have no idea what the rules are around that.
Yeah, it is. It's very, plentiful. There are tons of podcasts out there, and trying to find your little niche and trying to find a core group to support you and listen is the holy grail that we're all searching for. So what I tell people when they ask me is, I go, if you're doing it for fun and you're doing it, we all love listeners and we all want more listeners, but if you are having fun with your guest or your co-host, that's enough. And then kind of go from there.
Yeah, I think
So,
that's
yeah.
really good advice. And I'm certainly having fun. I love each and every one that I speak to. They've all got such fabulous backstories. As a journalist, my best skill always was the ability to listen. So people often say to me, "Do you prepare questions? Do you get nervous when you speak to these people?" And we're talking about some pretty big names. We're talking about people like Gordon Lightfoot and Peter Frampton and Randy Bachman from BTO, and Mike Campbell from Tom Petty, or now he has a Mike Campbell and the Dirty Knobs, the late BJ Thomas, Ray Stevens. There's lots of really big names in there. So no, I don't get nervous and I don't prepare questions for them, although I do my research, and often they thank me for researching, which I kind of feel very weird about, because research is part of the job, and that's what you do. You don't go in and talk to somebody about their life unless you know where you want to go with it. But
Yeah, one of the things that I always try to keep in mind There's a local DFW sportscaster named Norm Hitzges who's been around just forever. And he talked about that when he says, if you talk to Nolan Ryan, the baseball pitcher, and ask him about his 7 no-hitters or his 5,000 strikeouts, he will give you kind of some rote answers. If
Yeah.
you ask about the home runs he hit when he was in the National League, because he didn't always get to, hit, his face lights up and he just starts telling stories. So I always think of that going, what are the stories that people may not have had a chance to share? Right. And so I think that's where you go for the research, and you think about, well, what would be something they would want to share that they don't get to talk about a lot. And, I'm lucky, Sandy, because I will have podcasters on the show, and often they're smiling because they go, I usually on my podcast, I'm promoting my book, I'm talking about business processes, and on you, I just got to talk about music and it was fun. So that's great.
Yeah.
So
Talking
Sandy,
about music is awesome, isn't it? It's really one thing
it
that we
really is.
all love.
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning. Where'd you grow up and what kind of music did your family listen to?
I grew up here in Melbourne, Australia. My parents were Holocaust survivors. My mother from Poland, my father from Romania. So when they arrived in Australia, they were, so busy trying to carve out a life for themselves. The music that I grew up with, I remember, gosh, it was a long time ago, but I remember my mother used to play a lot of, do you remember that song, Never on a Sunday? I don't even remember who did it. Never on a Sunday, a Monday, a Tuesday. You don't know, do you?
No, I don't know that one, but that's okay.
It was so old. My dad loved classical music, so I had that all around me. I didn't really get into what they were listening to. My earliest memory, and you might be amused by this, do you remember the Dinah Shore show?
Sure.
So in Australia, we took a lot of television from both the US and the UK. We were a kind of fledgling little industry at the time. So we were dependent upon getting stuff, the best of your stuff and the best of the stuff from the UK. We were very well-rounded in our education here. Anyway, Dinah Shore became my heroine. And my parents would go out, I'd be about 9 years old. My parents would go out on a Sunday afternoon, I remember, and I would rearrange the couches in the lounge room. My mother had a light blue single stemmed rose vase, and that became my microphone. And I would sit down and interview imaginary friends. My imaginary friends were people like the Beatles, Elvis Presley, the Monkees, a few actors. Actually, they were mainly music people even at that time. And that's how I'd spend my Sunday afternoons when my parents went out. And I'd have a fabulous time talking to all my imaginary star friends.
So Sandy, have you in your career been able to talk in reality to people that young Sandy did in virtual?
I spoke to Mickey Dolenz from the Monkees, and I was transformed into being that child again. Yeah. I was either 9 years old or I was 14 years old, but I was gobsmacked. Talk about being nervous and not being able to put a sentence together. It was quite hilarious. I came off the phone from him and my partner was just looking at me, said, "What is wrong with you?" He's a journalist too. Mm-hmm. I said, "But you don't understand. That was Mickey from the Monkees. I loved." Oh, it was insane. One of my other heroes always, I mean, Elvis, I unfortunately never got a chance to talk to, but the other one that I used to interview on the couch sometimes was Muhammad Ali. Mm-hmm. And I did get an opportunity to speak with him. In fact, I became quite friendly with him. He visited Australia in the late 70s when he was completely healthy and at the peak of his profession. And he was holding a press conference at a hotel in Sydney. I was a kind of young, I was probably 18 years old. I was a cub radio reporter and I was sent to talk to him. And I sat down and joined the press conference with all the other journalists there, and he wasn't turning up. Everyone was just waiting for him. So my buddy who worked for 60 Minutes, I tapped him on the shoulder. I said, "Come on, let's go and find his room." I don't remember how we found his room, but we did. And we knocked on the door, and the big man opened the door and he said, "You go, you stay." He was always a sucker for a young, pretty lady. My friend Michael had to walk away and go and join the rest of the media throng with his tail between his legs. And I went in with my little, at the time, cassette recorder, and I sat with Muhammad Ali. And I just found this cassette the other day. For the next 2 hours, he gave me this dissertation on motivation by Muhammad Ali. And he did all of these station IDs for me too. So I was the hit of the radio station.
Oh, wow. That's great.
It was awesome. The awaiting media weren't very happy with me as we then came down the elevator and approached them. But that was the start of a lovely friendship. And when he then came from Sydney to Melbourne some weeks or months later, I can't remember, I went to see him again, and we'd become buddies. And he was the greatest.
Yeah, that's awesome. I loved the Ken Burns documentary that just recently came out on him. Just so well done, and
Yeah.
so really someone that's had so much to admire and so much to
Yeah.
love about. So you kind of moved away from, you weren't really embracing your parents' music. So when did you discover pop and rock and roll? And tell me that journey.
Okay. I started fairly early. I was kind of always a bit old for my time. So in the late 60s, even though I was, just 9 or 10 years old, I was already into music. There was a television show here called Make It or Break It, where the host would spin the singles of the day, and the audience would have to vote whether it was going to be a hit or a miss.
Right.
And you probably had the same show. We probably just replicated that. And I remember they gave me a copy of that single at the time, and that was the first single I ever owned. I was right into music always. I don't know why. I had a record player. I was buying music when I was 10 or 12 years old. I mean, I started work at the local newsagent when I was 12 in order to have money to buy music. And of course, when I went to high school, we were right into it. It was the heyday of music. It was already the early 70s, and music, I don't know if you've seen that documentary, 1971, the year the music changed. It's a sensational documentary if you haven't seen it. And I was living those days. I mean, the Vietnam War had been and gone, the hippie age of the 60s had been and gone. I wasn't into that folk music. I was a little bit too young to even embrace the Beatles. But what was coming out next was this revolution in music where everybody was out there, and the radio played such a huge part. I would go to bed with music on the radio and wake up with it first thing. Of course, there was no such thing as AirPods in those days. We had small transistors that we were running around with, but music was my accompaniment to everything from meals to showers to school. We would meet at school, and we had kind of a homeroom, and we'd turn the music up really loud, and everybody would be dancing to it, and we'd be singing the words to every song. It was the soundtrack to our youth. I mean, I'm sure that everyone has similar stories because music played so heavily in our youth. I'm not sure that that's the case so much these days. I don't think that the generations probably post-90s will grow up as heavily attached to the music as what we did. I can't even imagine who they would think to interview in 30 years' time from their youth, or how attached they will be to those sounds then. I just don't think it's as important these days as what it was to us.
Well, I think it's different. I sounds like you and I are right at the same age. I was born in 59. I graduated high school in 77. So that, I remember getting, my first transistor radio, the clock radio that was next to my bed, turned to the AM, rock station, and you listen to whatever the radio was playing.
Yeah.
And so, and in 73, 74, 75, a wide diversity of, there was plenty of, rock and roll, there was plenty of blues, there was plenty of pop, there was plenty, of soul. And so you kind of got a wide range. And we now are very fragmented, right? You can, if you want to have, Sirius XM, you can have the Beatles channel, you can have the E Street channel, you can have the Grateful Dead channel, you can have the Jimmy Buffett channel, the Dave, Matthews channel, or, I don't know if there is that same kind of diversity on
Right.
regular radio.
You don't get the whole rounded experience. You don't get, and everything you're right is now pigeonholed where it wasn't then. You got a full smorgasbord and you go, oh, I love that. I'm going to follow up on that. Or, yeah, that's kind of interesting. You got a full range of musical education, which people do not get today. Hey, Jesse, what year did Born to Run come out, the album?
So 75, right?
I think 75 already, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
we were illuminated. We were set on fire by that record, weren't we?
Oh, tell me that story.
Oh, I just remember, I mean, before that, I remember going to bed, talk about clock radios. I remember hearing Billy Joel's first album, and I was blown away by him. But when Springsteen came around with Born to Run, that was like a whole other thing. Our school just erupted. Everybody had a copy of Born to Run. You just were not cool if you weren't into that. And we were all singing it, as you would walk, from actually 75, I was still at school. You would walk from one class to the other, just pounding the songs from that album. We were very Bruce Springsteen affected.
The what about his music spoke to you?
The pounding rhythm, the rawness.
You think so?
Yeah. The wildness of it all. There hadn't been that much music till that point, had been quite sweet, I think. Well, certainly the music I'd been listening to, it was all kind of, you'd gone through that bubblegum sort of phase, and there wasn't, there was a bit of that heavy stuff, the Black Sabbath stuff, the Deep Purple stuff around at that time, but that was really poundy and heavy. Springsteen kind of came somewhere in the middle, and he had a message in there as well that we were all getting. I think we were really picking up on that. Have you met him?
So I've met him for 7 seconds, or roughly. When he did his autobiography, he did tours at different bookstores, and if you stood in line and bought a copy of the hardback, it was pre-signed, but you got 7 seconds, or long enough for you to stand in front of him, shake his hand, and they took a picture. So I got to do that. I was able to interview Mike Appel, talk about, which was his first manager and one of the producer on his first 2 albums, and then worked on Born to Run, and then they had a divorce. And that was a fun talk. That was really insightful to hear about those early days. Did you continue to follow Bruce as yeah?
Yeah, always. I loved his music. He was here in Australia on several occasions. I remember seeing him at least once. Yeah, Australia was wild. Everywhere was wild about Bruce Springsteen, wasn't he? He was just a hometown hero who'd made his way up from street level. And I think that was what was so endearing about him also, that he was a real ground level sort of guy who had a big sound, and he wasn't pretentious, and he wasn't even so conscious of his image. He just seemed to be playing Bruce. And
he's getting a little bit of grief right now because of the latest tour and the tickets. I don't know if you've heard of that, down there. He's announced both European tour and US tours, And obviously tickets are hard to get. And there's a whole thing about Ticketmaster's now doing dynamic pricing. So tickets are expensive for certain sections. Yeah, it's been tough. But we are getting a new tour. We're getting the E Street Band back on the road. And I'm sure you guys are hoping that he makes his way down there for another trip. I remember, I guess it was 16. Was it? Well, anyway, the last trip, I'm drawing a blank, right? He did New Zealand and Australia, and
Yeah.
all the shows are available on their download, and they sounded like they were amazing shows.
Yeah. I don't think he's ever had a bad show, has he? I
Probably
can't
not.
think of one that's really
Yeah.
gone off. I
Yeah.
mean, I think I recall reading one time where he was so drunk that he couldn't perform very well. But on the whole,
Yeah.
you can count on Bruce Springsteen. It's a bit like McDonald's. You can count on it being the same quality every
Yeah.
time you go.
Yes. Yeah. So, why? Talk to me about leaving law school and getting into music journalism. What was speaking to you? Why did you decide you need to do that?
Well, I didn't actually chase music journalism at the time. It was actually news, current affairs journalism. Law school was so boring. It was so boring. And I had when I was a kid, we used to dance on a national television show. Was creative dance. So the limousine used to come and pick me up from primary school and take me to the television studio and then take us back. And all the kids at the school used to watch this show in the theaterette. So, I already felt like a bit of a star at that age. But I think I fell in love with the smell of film at the TV studio. There was something about the studio and that smell. Of course, it was in the days before tape. And when I jumped out of law school, I knew that media was calling me. I couldn't get into journalism school at the time. There was only one journalism school, and they took 30 applicants from right around the country. It was really in the formative stages. So I knew that if I wanted to do this, I'd have to learn on the job. And I grabbed a girlfriend of mine that I was working with here. I mean, we were, 17 years old. And I ran away to the Gold Coast with her, and I was such an idiot. I was the mouth, and she was this beautiful looking girl. I went to the production manager of the radio station, and I said, "Look, have you got a job for us?" And he said, "Well, as it happens, I've got one job. When you have promotions girls that wear those bikini, they don't exist anymore today. We used to wear a sash and bikinis and get on the beaches and, do live calls back on radio saying, everybody come down here and get your prizes and pick up litter from this beach and whatever." He said, "Well, I've got a job for one of you." I said, "You know what? We'll take it." And I was so stupid that I didn't even realize that would mean we'd have to share the wage, which we did. And we starved for that whole year. But we had such amazing fun. And she would be the gorgeous, long, blonde hair, beautiful girl on the beach. And I wasn't that bad, but I wasn't anywhere near what she looked like. And I'd be the one getting on the microphone doing all the, "Hey, here we are on the beach, come on down," type stuff. So that was my first job in radio. And when I came back to Melbourne, I hassled a news director at an AM radio station to see if I could do traffic reports. I'd had no training in any of this. I rang him every single day for 3 months. "Hello, Barry, it's Sandy here. Got any work for me today?" This poor man, I drove him crazy. I'm not quite sure why he accepted my calls every day, but he did. And 3 months later, he said, "You know what, Sandy, it's your lucky day. Our traffic reporter's gone down sick. Why don't you come in and do the traffic reports for us?" So, yay! So I drove down and I had no idea what I was doing. I started telling people to get off the road that I wanted to come home on so there'd be less traffic along it. I was just playing, right? Anyway, he liked my style for some reason. A few weeks later, he said to me, "Would you like to read the news?" I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll read the news." No training, no idea what I'm doing.
That
I
is
had
wonderful.
addiction. I started reading the news, and these were in the days where there were no female voices on the radio at all, apart from the token traffic presenter who was female. You had to be male to be on the radio. They said that female voices just didn't work on radio. So I start reading the news, and this all male newsroom, they were like, very conservative NPR type trained broadcast journalists. They all started arcing up, and they'd said to this news director, if you don't sack this young upstart of a girl, we're all going to resign. So he had no choice. He had to fire me. And I remember driving home on that day where I'd told people to clear off the road several weeks earlier with tears streaming down my face. I'd been fired for the first time anywhere. No, I'd only started a few months earlier. Anyway, I got picked up in, as I was saying, media, you go from one gig to the next gig to the next gig. I got picked up by the coolest radio station of the day. They were the most hip one in the whole country, and they were playing the greatest music. They were interviewing the greatest stars. They had the greatest presenters, and they wanted me to join them on the breakfast show to do some research. So I started to learn all about how to research, how to find guests, who would work, who wouldn't, how to write questions, all of that sort of stuff. And I did that for a while too, which was fabulous, until I got headhunted and they wanted me to come to Sydney to be Sydney's first female newsreader on radio. So I went there and lasted there for a while. And, there was a lot of press around me being the first.
Sure.
So that was kind of fun. When I came back, I joined another radio station. And in those days, making phone calls was really expensive. The internet hadn't been invented yet. And I was producing for a breakfast host who wanted some big name acts on the show. So I was spending a lot of time and a lot of the station's money reaching out to the US to try and bring in celebrities to talk to my radio host. I managed to do that. I got some great guests for him, including, people like Mickey Rooney and Jane Fonda and all sorts of people. But I got fired for running the telephone bill up too high.
Yes.
So radio has changed so much. The world has changed so much.
It did.
In those days. Of course, now we can reach out to anybody anywhere through the internet for nothing.
Exactly.
My skills as a journalist and as a broadcaster back from those training days has really stood me in good stead, because I pride myself on being able to find anybody anywhere. And the third segment of my show, it's called A Breath of Fresh Air. And if anybody wants to listen and wants a request, you just got to get in touch with me through the website of breathoffreshair.com.au. You got to put the AU on because that's for Australia. So my third segment is my listeners segment, and I ask them if there's somebody special that they'd like to hear from. It doesn't matter, as long as they come from the 50s, 60s, sorry, not the 50s, as long as they come from the 60s, 70s and 80s, that's when they started making music, I'll track them down and find them. So whether they're one-hit wonders or they're the Bruce Springsteens of this world, I'll do my damnedest to find them and to try and bring them onto the show. And then what I do is try and hook up the listener so that listener can say hi to their favorite musician.
How wonderful. That sounds nice.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun for everybody.
That's really nice. Yeah. What have you learned since you've been doing this in the podcast? You've mentioned already, you've learned to slow it down a little bit. You're used to, I'm a big fan of talk radio, and they'll talk about, we're just trying to get through segments, right? Like they're just like, you've got the 3 segments an hour or 4 segments an hour, and I'm just trying to, burning segments. What else have you learned about maybe yourself or about, the current state of the industry?
Of radio or of podcasts?
Both.
I've learned that radio is dying.
Yeah.
That you cannot gauge listenership at all. I've learned that radio is changing, and I think it's changing more into combining talk with music. So we had the distinction between talk radio and music radio. And I think now we're seeing a bit of a crossover blend coming. And certainly that's where I'm taking my podcast. I mean, podcasts are traditionally talk without music. My podcast and radio show, which are identical, are that crossover. They blend the talk with the music. And I think that people are really liking that. I think that's where we're heading. I hope that's where we're heading anyway. What I've learned about me is that where I feel like I said earlier, I feel like I know about traditional media. I know nothing about podcasts, about this whole industry. And I'm trying to figure out if anybody actually knows anything about it. There are a lot of experts out there that claim to know lots, and we'll give you the tools and the tricks, and we'll tell you how to do this, this, and this, and this. And I think they're writing the rules as they go. I'm excited to be in this podcasting space because I think it's the future of audio. I think that it will replace radio completely. I think that there are a lot of people in this industry, the podcast industry, who give it a go, who think, oh, we'll try this, who like the sound of their own voices, and who drop off after a few broadcasts because it's not half as easy as it appears to be. And I think that what's left, those who persevere with it, will rise to the top. And as the numbers kind of go down, it will be the new radio, because I think the personalities in podcasting will rise to the top. I think radio has lost the big personalities. I'm not sure about in the States, but in Australia, where you used to have radio personalities hosting their shows, that we seem to have replaced them now with comedians doing radio.
Yeah.
And comedians doing radio doesn't really work. I mean, okay, they're a bit funny, but you've got to have a kind of radio voice to do radio, to be easy to listen to. And comedians don't necessarily have that at all. And I don't think radio needs to be all about laughter. There's a whole lot more that traditional radio brought the listener. What I've learned is that I think life is cyclical, and what is old is new again. And even in terms of music, what I seem to discover is not only old people making new music, but the sounds of the 60s, the 70s, less so the 80s. I think the sound itself is coming back again. We're having a revolution of that starting again. So
yeah,
that's what I've learned.
I love that. You talked about talking to Mickey Dolenz. Are there a couple other interviews that stand out that you wanted to pinch yourself and go, I can't believe I'm getting to talk to this person?
Yeah, more than a couple. I mentioned that I'm usually not nervous, and I found myself extremely nervous speaking to Graham Nash from Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. I don't exactly know why, other than I was so into that music as a kid. I really enjoyed talking with Peter Frampton. He's the nicest, most down-to-earth guy I think one of them I've ever spoken to. He was sensational. I spoke to someone like Norman Greenbaum, who did Spirit in the Sky. It was a hoot talking to him. Someone like Melanie, who I was such a young child when she had all her hits in the 60s. Speaking to her was just fabulous. George Thorogood, I loved talking to that bad boy of rock. He was fabulous fun. Who else have I spoken to? Gordon Lightfoot, who I wasn't such a big fan of personally, but since I've been posting about Gordon Lightfoot, I've discovered that he's got the biggest fan base on social media that I've ever encountered. How interesting. And speaking to him, I chased him for many, many months before I got the interview. And I have to tell you that speaking to him was a little disappointing. He's 83 years old. There are many 83-year-olds, people like Dion DiMucci, who are in great shape. Gordon Lightfoot was like chatting to somebody's grandfather who had their hearing aid out. And it was a really difficult interview to do, but a very worthwhile one, because these guys, are not going to be around for very much longer. So I did enjoy speaking to him too. Colin Hay from Men at Work, our very own Colin Hay, who lives in Los Angeles now and is kicking butt there. He's great. I never realized how smart he was. There's a whole bunch of them who I guess growing up I took for granted, thinking that, you know, hey, these guys are just making music, and didn't really know or understand how deep they were as people and their philosophies on life. So some of my interviews kind of get right into not only behind the songs, but behind the people, of who they really are and why they got into music and what the music means to them, and why they devoted themselves to music instead of, you know, getting college degrees that they'd set out to do. So I've just had a ball. I'm still having a ball with all of this, Jessie. I love talking to these musicians, and I love playing their music and getting a fresh understanding of the meaning of these songs that I just grew up with and still know all the words to. It's incredible that we know all the words to all the songs that we grew up with, right?
It really is. It's just amazing. It's such a joy. I'm right there with you. I think you can tell the enthusiasm in your voice, and your face is just lighting up. That's great. So what's next? What just continuing to have fun and continuing to talk to people?
I'm having fun. I've got to start making a few dollars out of it, because I do pay a wonderful audio engineer in Brazil to mix and master my show for me. So I'm kind of bleeding money with this podcast. I've been speaking to other podcasters, and they're bleeding even more heavily than I am, because they pay for promotion and to get subscribers. I'm still trying to figure out the road to gathering more listeners and finding my niche audience. But yeah, in the meantime, I will keep having fun. I will streamline it. So instead of having 3 guests a week, it's difficult. I mean, I'd love to try and give more and more in the 52 minutes that I provide. But if I've got 1 guest, that's a whole lot easier and a lot less time consuming than trying to push 3 out a week.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I will try and streamline it so that I've got a life as well. My partner's complaining. He's going off to Europe next month. And I said, I can't go. I can't actually physically get 4 or 5 weeks ahead of my show so that I could travel and not have to work. Yeah. Which is, I mean, that's a crazy situation.
That is, yeah, it is.
It's a hobby.
Got to find that balance. Yeah, you do.
I'm looking for it. Have you found it?
Depends on the day. One of the things that I'm pretty good at is I have this fear that I'm going to run out of people to talk to. So I usually have anywhere from 8 to 12 episodes in the can, you know, and so that's good. And so we're doing a family vacation in September. And so I'm basically probably going to take off most of September and not record any episodes. And I've got enough in the bank. My wife will tell you that the more stressed I get about life, the more I podcast, because it's a way to control and it's an outlet. So I'm lucky. This is my hobby. Some people play golf or, collect baseball cards, or, buy expensive bottles of wine or bourbon. I podcast. And so this is where I spend my time, and I love it. I love talking to people. I'm about to hit episode 900, and I'm trying to find I'm reaching out in all my contacts to try to get somebody special for the 900th episode.
I'm not special enough.
You are very special. So if you know of anyone, please send them my way. But yeah.
Who would your dream guest be, Jesse?
Well, of course, you'd love to talk to Bruce or anyone from the E Street Band. I
can send you Steve Van Zant's contact details.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. I've talked to Maureen, his wife, twice, and we had a lovely talk. I would love to talk to someone like, Tom Hanks is a huge Springsteen fan. So is Rob Lowe, so is Chab Lowe, Mick Foley, the wrestler, huge Springsteen fan. I would love to have someone like that to talk about their fandom, just to have them on the same kind of show
Right,
where we
right.
not necessarily talk about their career, but just
Uh-huh.
their fandom. So that would be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go for it. I'm sure you'll get it. How wonderful. 900 episodes. You
Yeah.
rock.
Yeah. It's been fun. It's a lot of fun. So anything that I should have asked you that I haven't?
I think you've got it all going on. If you tell your audience to take a listen to my little show, I'd be very grateful.
We will be doing that. Absolutely. All right. Before I'm going to have you give all where to contact and all the plug, but I end every episode with the Mary question. So Jay Armstrong, who was an high school honors teacher who recently retired, but he would take Thunder Road and break it apart as a poem. They would look at all the lyrics, they would talk about the themes, and then he would ask his class at the end of the 2 days, does Mary get in the car? So Sandy Kaye, does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
No, I
Okay.
don't think she does.
Tell me why.
Listened and listened. I just think he's left it open-ended intentionally. I think he's wearing his heart on his sleeve. I think he's dreaming that she would ever consider going with him anyway. He's a working class boy, and Mary seems like she's got a little bit more sense, or she'd listen to her parents a little bit more closely. So no,
I love that. I love that answer.
Considered it, but I think she's chickened out in the end.
That sounds like a good answer. I appreciate it. Sandy, if someone wants to reach you, how can they? What's the best way to hear the show?
The website has all the places that you can subscribe to the podcast. It also has episodes that are downloadable. It also has lots of information about the artists that I speak to that week and every week beyond that. And the website address is www.abreathofreshair.com.au. So a breath of fresh air, as you would spell it, .com.au. Or you can, of course, search for A Breath of Fresh Air on all of the major platforms that you listen to your podcasts on and click it. There are a few Breath of Fresh Airs, so you have to look for the one that says with me, Sandy Kaye. And my tagline, which I really love, it's a new tagline, new podcast artwork, is their stories, their lives, their music.
Oh, I do love that.
Me too.
That's great. That's a great tagline. That's wonderful. Well, Sandy, thank you for getting up in the morning and visiting with me. Thank you. This was a blast. We will have to do it again sometime. I will just wish you continued success. I'm going to check out some of the episodes, and I'm looking forward to hearing more stories in the future. And so thank you for your time. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Jesse, and you. Thanks so much for having me on, and congratulations on all your hard work. I can't wait for your 900th episode. How awesome are you? You're an inspiration to us all, us young podcasters, well, young in duration.
Yes.
To just keep on going.
You are so sweet. Listeners, go check out Sandy's A Breath of Fresh Air. Go talk to your family doctor. Find out, get boosted, get vaccinated, and let's try to be kind to each other, because that's the only way we're going to get through this. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, listeners. We'll talk to you soon. Goodbye. Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at SetListingBruce, and my personal Twitter is at JesseJacksonDFW. You can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference. You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast.
That is the one, the only, Set Listing Bruce. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.